Hello, welcome to Gardener's World. Now, our tomatoes in the greenhouse have probably got another few weeks' life here in the middle of England, but it's a law of diminishing returns because the light is fading every day. We need more money to keep them warm, and they will ripen very slowly indeed. So what I think we shall do is pull them up, and that will make space that we can use, and hang them upside down with the fruits still attached to the plant, and they should ripen in the shed. Now, if you haven't got room for that, you can cut off the green ones and put them in a drawer. Cover them with a piece of newspaper, and they will ripen gradually over the next few weeks. But first of all, I'm going to harvest the ripe ones. Now, this is a variety called Andine Cornu, which is one of my favourite for cooking. Now, this variety here is Costoluto di Fiorentino, and this one is San Marzano. Right, those will go to the kitchen, and now we can just cut away the canes on these. The roots come away without any problem at all, and you can see there, if I hold the weight, how small the roots are. Of course, there are much more left in the ground, and that will all go to improve the soil. And I'll just hang these up in the potting shed and let those ripen. Now, I'm not just dealing with tomatoes in today's programme, I'm also collecting other fruit and storing it. And Carol is working in the cottage garden, and Joan will be in the viewer's garden doing some very necessary pruning. Well, the heavens have just opened and I got completely caught in it, but never mind, I won't melt. Now, this part of Berryfields was planted up by Rachel in the summer of 2003. And the colour scheme that she used was based on burgundies and pinks and all the colours in between. And it has looked lovely. But nearly 4 years later, it's time for a change. I don't want to change the layout of the garden, but I do think we could have a different colour scheme. And what I propose to make here is a green garden. I don't mean an evergreen garden or topiary or formal garden. I mean a garden that uses every permutation of green leaf and flower to create a space that is both intensely calm and restful, and also got the vibrancy, that wonderful new green of spring that is the most exciting thing in the whole of the plant world. Now, obviously, the first thing I've got to do is to remove those plants that we know we shan't be using. And obviously, we'll try and use them wherever we can in other parts of Berryfields. Things like the sedums, like the cotinus, like this purple elder. In fact, I'll start with the biggest, this purple elder, cut it back, and then just start digging. Now, cutting this elder back won't in any way harm it. It will make it easier to move. And we did think that, having talked about making a green garden, we ought to go and see one that's mature and worked well. So we paid a trip to see Kevin Wilson of Dulwich, right in the middle of London, to see how he had transformed his garden into a green oasis.
Mainly for foliage, because there's so many different sort of shades of green, there's so many different leaf shapes, so much sort of architectural planting as well, and it gives you a sort of a lusher atmosphere. It's nice to allow plants to do a little bit of what they want to do themselves. Well, to keep this green garden interesting, I tend to sort of mix lots of plants and climbers together, and they all do something different at different times of the year. You might have morning glory, which of course does flower and has beautiful heart-shaped leaves as well. Jasmines, honeysuckle. This garden, it's very lush, and you don't just have the planting below you and around you, but you have it above you. There's lots of ducking and diving in this garden. There is a lot of decking in this garden. I've softened all the edges with curves, and it follows the line of the plants. And then you soften it with the plants around the edges and things, so therefore it doesn't look as harsh. And there is a piece around here on this other bit of decking where tree fern is actually, you know, I've actually cut sort of a 9-inch hole in the decking, and the tree fern actually comes out of the hole in the decking. So you know, it looks a lot more natural. It's nice to have the summer house, especially at the bottom of the garden where most people would have a compost heap. And also, when I opened the garden through the NGS, the National Garden Scheme, it's a really nice surprise for people. Plus, when I have friends come to stay, or even myself, you know, sometimes sleep out here, and it's so nice to sleep with sort of the doors open and wake up to sort of brilliant sunshine at 5, 6 o'clock in the morning, and you're in total fresh air. And it is such a nice vista from here as well. Look, you know, a pool for me. The pool, it's basically poured concrete between shutters. You know, there's a few tons of concrete in it. I painted it with a swimming pool paint, but it has its own plug and it flows away into a soakaway, so it sort of waters the garden as you drain it. So, you know, and the colour looks fabulous against the decking in the green. The garden wasn't actually planned, it just sort of just developed. And I mean, such as this miscanthus here, this all started from, you know, one plant in a 3-litre pot. And every year I sort of, you know, split it. And eventually, we got a wall of miscanthus, which is nice because, you know, as the wind blows and everything, it moves. And even in the autumn, when it loses its green, you've got a lovely oaty colour right through to the spring. Also, I have Maclea, which has a nice sort of greeny blue leaf, with serrated edges, but grows to about 8 foot tall. I've got this contorted willow in the middle of the decking, which absolutely looks sort of wonderful and sort of nice drippy foliage. I've got the cordyline palms, which again grow absolutely massive, and every time they flower they split. I mean, it's a real mixture. The thing is, just let yourself go wild, let your plants go wild a little bit, rather than crop them, let them flow a little bit.
Right. Nothing else coming.
I should lift up.
There we go. Whoa, got it. Well, I thought this was going to be a quick show. Well, I'm glad you're getting as wet as I am.
Yeah, well, the rain's good for transplanting, there's no doubt about that.
It is, and I think there's actually going to be quite a lot to take out here.
Now, what about these roses then?
They've definitely got to go.
And they're going to do? Take them down to the nursery bed, do you think?
You could put some up, I think.
Put some up and some down the nursery
Yeah,
bed.
because they'll heal in, I would have thought.
Okay.
I'll just clear this out of the way.
Okie dokie.
And I'll start to put this through the shredder.
Okay. Well, there's quite a few roses in this bed, and unfortunately none of them are the right colour. But we're not going to lose them. I'm going to lift them up carefully. The most important thing is to get as much of that root system, that root ball, out as possible. Now, the next thing to do, sharp pair of secateurs. And there you go, as you can see, I've cut it really hard back. Now, the next thing to do is to get a pot and some compost. Just as you would with any other plant. Make sure that there's plenty of room for the root ball, and then just backfill it. Make sure there's no air gaps in there. Put this one into a container because many of you won't have a nursery bed to store plants in. So this is the best way of doing it. Put it into a container until you know exactly where you want to put it in the long term. But the rest of these, I'm going to dig up, put them in a barrow and take them down to the nursery bed. But it's exactly the same principle.
It has been a really good summer for fruit. And here in our fruit gardens at Berryfields, we're getting quite a decent harvest. If you're growing apples and pears, and after all, that's what most of us grow, there is a real point in making them last as long as possible. Now, this is Burr Hardy, which is a beautiful pear. Now, when you know a pear is ready to pick, it's very simple. You just put your hand round it and gently lift it up. Now, if then, there you are, you see, that's just come away in my hand, and the others have fallen just on being moved, and they were absolutely ready. They wouldn't have lasted for more than another day. Now, at that point, they are ready to be picked, but they're not necessarily ready to be eaten, because pears ripen from the inside, and normally you have to store them off the tree for up to 10 days before they're ready to eat. Now this is a conference laden with fruit, and they should all be delicious, but conference is rather later than Burr Hardy, and you can see if I lift it up, it doesn't want to come away. That's still hanging, and that's all I have to do to test to see if it's ripe, because when that's ready, that will come away in my hand. Having picked your pears, it is worth storing them carefully, but only until they're ripe, and you need to check them daily, and then eat them straight away. And if you chill them, that will make them last longer, but you will lose that really beautiful fresh essence. However, an apple can be kept for months if you look after it properly. First rule is don't try and store a windfall. Even if it looks perfect, it won't store. Use up all your windfalls as soon as you pick them up and enjoy them there and then. But to store an apple, you need to pick it very carefully off the tree. And the method I like to use is simply to give it a twist. Now, I'm going to take out the pears and put those gently to one side. And as long as they're rodent-free and somewhere you can keep an eye on them, they can stay on a tabletop like that, and because those are going to be eaten in the next week or so. But the apples we do want to store for as long as possible. And we've got some fruit trays here. You can easily make these, and if you can get hold of them, I would recommend them highly, because they have the great advantage of not only stacking, so they don't take too much space, but also they let air in. And when you're storing an apple, it's really a question of balancing the humidity and the ventilation. If they're too damp, they'll rot, and if they're too dry, they'll shrivel up. And the ideal place to store them is a cellar or somewhere that is on the damp side, and then with plenty of air flowing around them, they will last a nice long time. If you're putting them in a shed or an attic or somewhere like that, it's not a bad idea to tear up some newspaper and simply loosely wrap each of the fruit, and that will keep some of the moisture in. But however you store them, put them so they don't touch. That way, if there is a little bit of bad on them, they won't spread, and check each one. And my final thing, if you've got enough, I would store each variety in a tray, or at least cookers all in one tray and eaters in another. That way, you know what you've got.
Lashing this honeysuckle, I'm going to cut it down, and I'm going to take it out eventually, because it's a plant that's in completely the wrong place. Now, the reason I'm doing this is because it's part of a big plan to really try and reassess this cottage garden. When you've got a garden that's close to a house, then what you want to be doing is looking at it all the time. You want interest there throughout the year. So we're very, very concerned about succession. I think we ought to have a modern take on a cottage garden, something that's very naturalistic and something that keeps on going for as many months of the year as possible. So this honeysuckle is going to come out. Well, that's really opened up the space, hasn't it? So one thing I'm going to do, first of all, is go right in, right the way round it, and actually cut the roots. Because when you're moving a big plant, a big climber or a tree, it's a good idea to cut the roots in advance. Now, this might seem like a very drastic action to take, but when you're moving a big climber or a tree, you're going to give it a shock. And the thing to do is to lessen the shock as much as possible. I've cut this hard back so the roots don't have to support all that growth which they would have tried to do. And the whole reason for severing these roots is just to make sure that all the roots inside there will make lots and lots of more fibrous roots, feeding roots, which are the important roots it will need when it's put into its new site. Well, I think that's enough for now. I'm going to water that well. But right now, behind me, if we were here in the spring, you'd see masses of Dicentra. There's a great wave of the white one there. And they love being on this side of the garden because they're shade lovers. But over here, there are some other Dicentras, and I want to move them because I think they're in the wrong place. Oh, I want to dig this dicentra up now when it's completely dormant. In fact, it becomes dormant during the summer, and it's pretty well established, but should have good, big, succulent roots. Ooh, yeah. It's a lovely, chunky plant. And you can already see on here the new buds forming right at the base of these stems. Just look at that. So I'm going to put it into this great big clay pot. This is not a new practice, actually. The Victorians used to do it. They'd actually go into the garden, dig up these great big lumps of perennials, things with succulent roots like this, and lots of fibrous rooted things too. And all you need to do is pot them up in just some ordinary potting compost. It's got a good percentage of loam in here, so it'll keep it going for ages. And just lift the dicentra root into there and tuck it in. Now, I could have divided it, but I'm not going to because I want a lot of impact from it. Well, I'm going to put this over there, up on the terrace. When it's in flower, it'll connect up with this dicentra on the other side. And that'll be the first step, really, towards making this plan to really integrate this garden and get the plants in the right place and in the right sort of succession too. Gardening's so wonderful. It's such a fantastic opportunity to be able to do something like this. And sometimes people's own gardens aren't enough for them. There are loads of people all around the country who volunteer to go and work in other gardens. And we went along to RHS Rosemore to meet some of their volunteers.
We ask them to give us about 4 hours a week. We don't stipulate when they need to come in, and we allocate each volunteer a section of garden which is theirs. It's quite a nice way of doing it because they are in competition with each other in a very friendly way. And they look after the deadheading, the weeding, edging if there is any, and all that sort of thing, which liberates our garden staff to do some of the beefier work.
Everybody's very friendly, very helpful. It's a lovely community, actually.
I suppose the other thing is to get some out of my wife's hair as well for the period I'm away.
The gardeners have been very helpful, I must say. I have picked up a lot of useful information here, but and they're just lovely people.
They're a great bunch, and of course they got so much information, which also comes in handy on a weekly basis when you're here, because if you haven't got the answers, then you basically know where to find it.
I do feel slightly possessive of the vegetable garden, yes, I do feel. It's in a sense, it's mine, although it belongs to everybody.
I like to think it's mine to take care of, but not mine in respect of a possession. I think it's really for the RHS and for the enjoyment of all the visitors.
People just love the garden. They enjoy the peace and the quiet, and they take a pride in looking after an area, and I think that's why they come.
I've been a long-term gardener for many years. On retirement, gave me the opportunity to come and work here. We all have an opportunity to sort of choose where we can work, and I must admit I wanted to come in the winter garden, and there was a vacancy in this area for volunteering. And there's certain advantages, of course, by coming to the RHS. There's always the sort of enjoyment of seeing so many people. It's a pleasure to be here.
If somebody would like to work here during the week, the working week, then they're very welcome to come and join us. And it doesn't matter if they don't have experience, we can help them learn. Not everyone's retired, of course. It just depends on people's personal circumstances. Some people come here who work shifts. A lot of our volunteers have stressful jobs. They're teachers. We have people who work in hospitals. So they find this is an escape for them.
I just love coming down here. I love gardening. And it's been my bolt hole, because if I can come down here away from home and the telephone and all the worries and the trials and tribulations of family life and just do what I want to do for 4 hours a week, I just love the garden. When they were starting the vegetable garden, I said, if you ever want to volunteer, please think of me. And luckily they did, so I've been here ever since it started. I just love it. It really is my idea of heaven, actually. When I die, if heaven is like this, that will be fine. I just love it.
Well, the viewer's jungle garden is just that. It's a complete jungle. We put it in last year and it's been incredibly successful. Some plants too successful, like these bamboos for a start, because in a way they're blocking the view through it. They're also blocking the access through it physically. So what I need to do is take some of the stems out, thin them out a little bit so I can create a view through the whole garden, draw the eye through to the lovely tree ferns beyond. We've got 3 different varieties here. Philostachys aureocorlis. It's got these wonderful alternate yellow stripes on the stems up here. At the back there, well, you can't see it, but there's a black bamboo, Philostachys nigra, and then this wonderful Philostachys holocryza, which has got the most amazing stems. I love the height of them. But really, when you're pruning bamboos, the last thing you want to do is to cut one of these in half. It's a real no-no. It makes such an ugly plant. We're looking for a lovely, tall, graceful bamboo. So I'm going to leave these big stems in there and just take out some of the weaker shoots, which, if you go right down to the bottom, that's where you want to cut them back. And there will be some thin and weak stems in here, and they're the ones you're really looking for. The ones that are a lot thinner than the nice big fat ones. And then you get your croppers, secateurs or whatever, and just take them right down to ground level. Be careful not to take out any shoots that might be emerging. And just take out maybe 1 in every 2, whatever is necessary, but just leave a few in there. And over time, those really nice big stems, it really opens this garden up. It draws the eye through the bamboos to the planting beyond. And at the same time, at eye level, you see the wonderful intricacies of each cane. Now, bamboos are such a low-maintenance plant, but you do have to get stuck into them once a year and open them out a little bit. Really pleased with that.
We realised we had to do something about the pond because half of it had disappeared. We really did need to rethink the clay lining. It's a good idea, but it isn't going to work. So what we'll do, in short, is lift the whole pond up and slide a geotextile lining underneath, put the clay back on. That will give us a smaller area of water that will sustain its level much better. We'll feed water in from the roof of the house to top it up. We will redesign the whole area. The nectar bar will be pulled right down to the edge of the pond with just a narrow grass path running through it. The meadow is getting rather much of a monoculture, and we will add plants to that and diversify that. The pond itself will be smaller, and finally there will be a path leading through to the woodland area at the back. So the whole area will be more integrated and incorporated into a rich wildlife environment. This redesigning is going to mean closing off the pond about where I am now. So that will make it appreciably smaller, and the space behind, we're not going to fill in as such, but use it for the bog garden. And around the edges, where you've got these exposed banks and almost little cliff faces, we'll draw those back, making shallow beaches, which we can then plant up. But before we can do any of that, we do need to salvage some of the plants that we want to keep. I want to salvage this Butomus if I can, because one of the aspects of a good wildlife pond is that it's quite heavily planted. We don't want to keep fish in here. So the more plants we have, the more wildlife will get in. Now I want to salvage as much of this failure as I possibly can because it's grown really well. And it's a lovely plant. Now these roots are really substantial. So while I'm busy, here are some ideas for some other things that you could be getting on with this weekend.
When container vegetable crops have been harvested, clear out the pots. But don't leave them empty, replenish with new compost and then try sowing fast-growing leaf crops such as rocket, spinach and winter lettuce to extend the season.
Now's the time to harvest the last of your soft-leaved herbs for storage before their leaves get too tough. One method is to pop them in a resealable bag, blow in a little air and pop them into the freezer. When you take them out, you can crumble them with your fingers. No need to chop. This way you can keep using your homegrown herbs all winter. You can see that these make fairly substantial sections even when they're chopped up. But if we store these in water and a little bit of soil packed around them,
They'll keep all winter if need be, but in fact we'll try and put them back as soon as we finish the pond. That's it for today. Next week we'll be back in the Long Borders. It'll be October and time to totally revamp them, and all three of us will be engaged on that. If you didn't manage to get all of today's programme, you can see it again over the next 7 days on Broadband. And don't forget, we have our special Broadband behind-the-scenes material. And if you don't know how to get that, go to our website and just follow the trail. Anyway, I'll see you next week on BBC Two at the normal time. Bye-bye.